What if a quiet boy from the streets of Leningrad grew up to become one of the most powerful and controversial leaders in modern history? Before he became the president of Russia, he was a secret intelligence officer in the Soviet Union's feared KGB. From living in a small communal apartment to leading the world's largest country, Vladimir Putin's journey is a story of discipline, ambition, secrecy, and power. Love him or criticize him, his decisions have shaped global politics for more than 2 decades. Today, we're exploring. Hello everyone, and welcome back to English Orbit. If you enjoy learning English through fascinating biographies and real historical stories, then you're in the right place. Today's documentary explores the life of one of the most influential and talked about political leaders of the modern era. Whether you admire his leadership or disagree with his decisions, there is no denying that Vladimir Putin has played a major role in shaping world politics for more than 2 decades. So grab your notebook, relax, and let's begin. The remarkable rise of Vladimir Putin, from spy to president. Childhood and family background. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on October 7, 1952, in Leningrad, Soviet Union, a city now known as St. Petersburg, Russia. His birth came just 7 years after the end of the Second World War. Although peace had returned to Europe, the Soviet Union was still recovering from one of the deadliest wars in human history. Cities were being rebuilt, families were recovering from unimaginable losses, and millions of people were trying to start their lives again. Few places suffered more during the war than Leningrad. For nearly 900 days, Nazi Germany surrounded the city during what became known as the Siege of Leningrad. Hunger, freezing temperatures, disease, and constant bombing claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians. Putin's own family experienced this tragedy firsthand. His father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, served in the Soviet Navy before joining special military units during the war. He was badly wounded while fighting German forces. His mother, Maria Ivanovna Putina, survived the siege despite severe starvation and illness. Before Vladimir was born, the family had already lost another son during World War II, a heartbreaking event that deeply affected his parents. Growing up in a family that had survived war taught young Vladimir valuable lessons about sacrifice, resilience, and patriotism. These experiences would quietly shape his worldview for years to come. A simple life in a communal apartment. Unlike many world leaders who grew up in wealth or privilege, Vladimir Putin spent his childhood in a modest communal apartment. Several families shared the same building. They shared kitchens, bathrooms, even hallways. Privacy was almost impossible. Life in post-war Soviet Russia was not easy. Food was limited. Money was scarce. Few people enjoyed. His mother did different jobs to support the family. Neither parent held powerful political positions. Instead, they believed that discipline, education, and hard work were the only ways their son could build a better future. Although the family had little money, they encouraged Vladimir to study hard and stay focused on his goals. Growing up in the streets of Leningrad, the streets where Vladimir grew up were rough. Many buildings still carried the scars of war. Street fights between children were common. Older boys often bullied younger ones. Respect had to be earned. Years later, Putin recalled one important lesson from those days. If a fight is inevitable, you must strike first. It was a philosophy born from survival rather than aggression. Living in such an environment made him mentally strong from an early age. Instead of fearing challenges, he learned to face them directly. These early experiences helped build the self-confidence that later became one of his defining characteristics. School years. During his early school years, Vladimir was not considered an outstanding student. He was energetic, curious, sometimes even mischievous. Teachers often described him as intelligent, but easily distracted. However, as he grew older, something began to change. He developed a strong interest in history, geography, foreign languages, and law. Unlike many classmates who dreamed of becoming soldiers or athletes, Vladimir became fascinated by intelligence officers. Books and films about Soviet spies captured his imagination. He admired men who worked quietly behind the scenes, protecting their country without seeking fame. By the age of 16, he had already decided on his dream. He wanted to join the KGB, the Soviet Union's most powerful intelligence agency. It was an ambitious goal because the KGB accepted only disciplined, highly educated, and politically trusted individuals. Instead of giving up, Putin began preparing himself. He realized that intelligence officers needed more than intelligence. They needed discipline, physical strength, patience, and complete self-control. Discovering judo. Around this time, Vladimir found something that would influence him for the rest of his life: judo. At first, he trained in boxing, but he later switched to judo and eventually sambo, a Russian martial art. These sports taught him much more than fighting techniques. They taught patience, balance, discipline, respect, and the importance of controlling emotions under pressure. Unlike street fighting, martial arts required calm thinking. Every movement had to be calculated. Every decision mattered. Putin trained with incredible dedication. Over time, he became one of the top young athletes in his region. Eventually, he earned the title of Master of Sports in Judo and Sambo. Even decades later, after becoming president, he continued practicing martial arts and often spoke about how they shaped his character. University education. Knowing that education was essential for joining the KGB, Putin focused on his studies. In 1970, he was admitted to the Faculty of Law at Leningrad State University, one of the Soviet Union's most respected universities. Law was an ideal subject for someone interested in intelligence work. It provided knowledge about government, legal systems, politics, and international relations. During university, Putin became known as a disciplined and serious student. He stayed away from unnecessary attention. Instead, he concentrated on academics, physical training, and preparing for his future career. His professors noticed his determination. His classmates remembered him as calm, confident, and highly focused. Every step he took seemed to move him closer to his childhood dream. The day the KGB came calling. Many people imagined that joining the KGB required submitting an application. But Vladimir Putin later revealed that it worked differently. Years earlier, he had actually visited a local KGB office to ask how he could become an intelligence officer. The officials gave him simple advice: complete university, study law, maintain an excellent reputation, then wait. The KGB would contact him if they believed he was suitable. Putin followed that advice. He worked hard, stayed disciplined, avoided trouble, and after graduating from university in 1975, the phone finally rang. The KGB had selected him. His childhood dream had become reality. But this was only the beginning, because from that moment onward, his life would disappear into a world of secrecy, intelligence operations, and missions that few people would ever know about. From spy to president. The rise of Vladimir Putin, the secret agent, East Germany, and the fall of the Soviet Union. Beginning a secret career. In 1975, after graduating from Leningrad State University with a law degree, Vladimir Putin achieved the goal he had pursued since his teenage years. He officially joined the KGB, the Soviet Union's main intelligence and security agency. At the time, the KGB was considered one of the most powerful intelligence organizations in the world. its responsibilities extended far beyond gathering information. It protected national security, conducted foreign intelligence operations, monitored political threats, and carried out counterintelligence missions. Only a small number of carefully selected candidates were accepted. Those chosen were expected to demonstrate loyalty, discipline, intelligence, and complete dedication to the Soviet state. For Putin, joining the KGB was not simply a job. It was the realization of a lifelong dream. Training to become an intelligence officer. Before taking part in real operations, Putin underwent specialized KGB training. The program was demanding. New recruits studied intelligence gathering, surveillance techniques, interrogation methods, psychology, foreign affairs, and state security. They were trained to remain calm under pressure, to observe without being noticed, to think logically instead of emotionally. Every decision could have serious consequences. Unlike soldiers on a battlefield, intelligence officers often fought invisible battles. Their greatest weapon was information. Putin embraced this environment. He preferred careful planning over unnecessary risks. Rather than seeking attention, he learned to work quietly behind the scenes. These qualities would later become defining features of his leadership style. Early assignments. After completing his training, Putin initially worked in Leningrad. His duties mainly involved counterintelligence. This meant identifying potential threats to Soviet security, monitoring sensitive activities, and protecting important institutions. Much of this work remained confidential. Like many KGB officers, Putin rarely discussed specific operations. His career was built on secrecy. Friends, and even some relatives knew very little about the details of his work. That was exactly how the KGB preferred it. The less people knew, the safer the mission. A new chapter, East Germany. In 1985, Putin received an important foreign assignment. He was sent to the city of Dresden in East Germany. At that time, Germany was divided into two separate countries. West Germany was a democratic nation aligned with Western Europe and the United States. East Germany was a communist state closely allied with the Soviet Union. The Cold War was still ongoing. Relations between East and West remained tense. Espionage had become one of the defining features of this global rivalry. For any KGB officer, an overseas assignment represented both an honor and a significant responsibility. Life behind the Iron Curtain. Dresden appeared peaceful on the surface. But beneath everyday life, intelligence agencies from both sides were engaged in constant competition. The KGB worked closely with East Germany's intelligence service, known as the Stasi. Their goal was to protect communist governments and monitor potential threats. Putin's work focused on gathering information, developing contacts, and supporting intelligence operations. Although many details remain classified, historians believe his assignments largely involved recruiting sources, analyzing information, and coordinating with allied agencies. Unlike the action movies that often portray spies, intelligence work required patience. Weeks could pass without dramatic events. Success depended on preparation, observation, and careful judgment. A life of discipline. While living in Dresden, Putin married Lyudmila Shkrebneva. The couple began building a family, and their daughters were born during this period. Despite his demanding career, Putin maintained his passion for martial arts and physical fitness. He believed discipline should extend beyond work. Colleagues often described him as organized, calm, and reserved. He rarely revealed strong emotions. Instead, he carefully observed situations before making decisions. This quiet and analytical personality would later become one of his trademarks. The Berlin Wall begins to crumble. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was changing. Under Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, reforms known as perestroika and glasnost encouraged greater openness and economic restructuring. However, these reforms also weakened Moscow's control over Eastern Europe. Across communist countries, citizens began demanding political freedom. Demonstrations grew larger. Governments struggled to maintain authority. Then came one of the most significant moments of the 20th century. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall began to fall. For nearly 3 decades, it had divided East and West Berlin. Now, crowds gathered to celebrate its collapse. People climbed onto the wall. Families reunited. The world watched history unfold live on television. For millions, it symbolized the approaching end of the Cold War. For Soviet intelligence officers stationed in East Germany, it created enormous uncertainty. The night that changed everything. As demonstrations spread through East Germany, angry crowds approached government buildings. One evening, protesters gathered near the KGB office in Dresden. Inside the building, Putin and a small number of colleagues faced an uncertain situation. Sensitive intelligence files had to be protected. Communication with Moscow became increasingly difficult. According to Putin's own later account, he contacted nearby Soviet military officials seeking assistance. The response shocked him. No clear orders came. No immediate help arrived. Instead, he reportedly heard words that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Moscow is silent. Realizing they were on their own, Putin and his colleagues began destroying classified documents to prevent them from falling into unauthorized hands. Hours of work turned into days, as mountains of secret files were burned. For an intelligence officer who had devoted his career to serving the Soviet Union, it was a deeply symbolic moment. The system that had once seemed permanent was beginning to collapse. The collapse of a superpower. In 1991, the unimaginable happened. The Soviet Union officially dissolved. 15 independent countries emerged from what had once been the world's largest communist state. For millions of Soviet citizens, it was a moment filled with uncertainty. The economy struggled. Political institutions changed rapidly. Old systems disappeared almost overnight. For Vladimir Putin, it was more than the end of a government. It was the end of the country he had sworn to serve. Years later, he would describe the collapse of the Soviet Union as one of the greatest geopolitical tragedies of the 20th century. The experience left a lasting impression on him. He believed that political weakness could lead to national decline. That lesson would strongly influence many of his future decisions. Returning home. With the Soviet Union gone, Putin returned to his hometown of Leningrad, soon renamed St. Petersburg. His career inside the KGB had come to an unexpected end. Many former intelligence officers struggled to adapt to the new Russia. Some left public service entirely. Others entered business. Few knew what the future would hold. Putin faced the same uncertainty. He had spent years preparing to serve a country that no longer existed. But history was about to offer him a completely different opportunity. One that would take him from the world of secret intelligence into the center of Russian politics, and eventually to the Kremlin itself. From the Kremlin to global power, 1999 to 2026. Entering Russian politics. After returning to St. Petersburg in the early 1990s, Vladimir Putin left full-time intelligence work and entered public administration. He began working under Anatoly Sobchak, the city's first democratically elected mayor. Putin handled foreign investment, international relations, and economic projects. Although he rarely appeared in public, senior officials noticed his discipline, efficiency, and ability to solve problems quietly. Over the next few years, he earned a reputation as someone who preferred results over publicity. That reputation would soon open the doors to Moscow. The road to the Kremlin. In 1996, Putin moved to Moscow and joined the Russian presidential administration. His responsibilities grew quickly. Within just a few years, he held several senior government positions. In 1998, he became the director of the Federal Security Service, FSB, the organization that replaced many of the KGB's domestic responsibilities after the collapse of the Soviet Union. For many observers, appointing a former intelligence officer to such an important position reflected the government's trust in Putin's leadership and organizational skills. His rise was remarkably fast, becoming prime minister. In August 1999, Russian President Boris Yeltsin appointed Vladimir Putin as prime minister. At that time, few people outside political circles knew much about him. Many analysts questioned whether the quiet former intelligence officer could lead a nation facing economic uncertainty, political instability, and growing security challenges. Putin responded with confidence. His firm leadership during the conflict in Chechnya quickly increased his popularity. Many Russians saw him as a leader determined to restore order and strengthen the state. The day everything changed. On December 31, 1999, Boris Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned. In a nationally televised address, he announced that Vladimir Putin would become acting president of Russia until new elections could be held. It was one of the most surprising political moments in modern Russian history. Just months earlier, Putin had been a relatively unknown government official. Now, he was leading the world's largest country. In March 2000, he won the presidential election and officially became the president of Russia. The former KGB officer had reached the Kremlin, restoring stability. When Putin took office, Russia was recovering from years of political and economic turmoil. His administration focused on strengthening federal authority, improving tax collection, reducing inflation, and rebuilding state institutions. At the same time, rising global energy prices increased Russia's revenues through oil and natural gas exports. Economic growth during the 2000s improved living standards for many citizens. Supporters argued that Putin had restored stability after a difficult decade. Critics, however, raised concerns about political freedoms, media independence, and the growing concentration of power. These different perspectives would continue throughout his presidency. Russia returns to the world stage. As Russia's economy improved, Putin also focused on rebuilding the country's military and expanding its influence in international affairs. He emphasized modernization, defense, and national security. Russia became more active in global diplomacy and regional conflicts. Over time, Putin established himself as one of the most influential leaders in world politics. Meetings with presidents, prime ministers, and international organizations became a regular part of his role. His decisions increasingly affected discussions on security, energy, trade, and global relations. The Georgia War. In 2008, tensions between Russia and Georgia escalated into a brief military conflict. The war lasted only a few days, but attracted worldwide attention. Following the conflict, Russia recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent states, while many other countries continued to regard them as part of Georgia. The event marked another important moment in Russia's foreign policy. In August 1999, Russian President Boris Yeltsin appointed Vladimir Putin as prime minister. At that time, few people outside political circles knew much about him. Many analysts questioned whether the quiet former intelligence officer could lead a nation facing economic uncertainty, political instability, and growing security challenges. Putin responded with confidence. His firm leadership during the conflict in Chechnya quickly increased his popularity. Many Russians saw him as a leader determined to restore order and strengthen the state. The day everything changed. On December 31, 1999, Boris Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned. In a nationally televised address, he announced that Vladimir Putin would become acting president of Russia until new elections could be held. It was one of the most surprising political moments in modern Russian history. Just months earlier, Putin had been a relatively unknown government official. Now, he was leading the world's largest country. In March 2000, he won the presidential election and officially became the president of Russia. The former KGB officer had reached the Kremlin, restoring stability. When Putin took office, Russia was recovering from years of political and economic turmoil. His administration focused on strengthening federal authority, improving tax collection, reducing inflation, and rebuilding state institutions. At the same time, rising global energy prices increased Russia's revenues through oil and natural gas exports. Economic growth during the 2000s improved living standards for many citizens. Supporters argued that Putin had restored stability after a difficult decade. Critics, however, raised concerns about political freedoms, media independence, and the growing concentration of power. These different perspectives would continue throughout his presidency. Russia returns to the world stage. As Russia's economy improved, Putin also focused on rebuilding the country's military and expanding its influence in international affairs. He emphasized modernization, defense, and national security. Russia became more active in global diplomacy and regional conflicts. Over time, Putin established himself as one of the most influential leaders in world politics. Meetings with presidents, prime ministers, and international organizations became a regular part of his role. His decisions increasingly affected discussions on security, energy, trade, and global relations. The Georgia War. In 2008, tensions between Russia and Georgia escalated into a brief military conflict. The war lasted only a few days, but attracted worldwide attention. Following the conflict, Russia recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent states, while many other countries continued to regard them as part of Georgia. The event marked another important moment in Russia's foreign policy. Returning as president. After serving as prime minister for several years, Putin returned to the presidency in 2012 following another national election. His return sparked both support and protests inside Russia. Supporters believed he provided stability and experienced leadership. Critics called for greater political competition and reforms. Despite these debates, Putin remained one of the country's dominant political figures. Crimea and international tensions. In 2014, following political developments in Ukraine, Russia took control of Crimea and later incorporated it into the Russian Federation. Russia described the move as reflecting the will of Crimea's population after a referendum. Ukraine and many countries rejected the action, considering Crimea part of Ukrainian territory under international law. The disagreement led to international sanctions and increased tensions between Russia and Western countries. It became one of the defining geopolitical events of the decade. Russia's role in Syria. Beginning in 2015, Russia expanded its military involvement in Syria in support of the Syrian government. Russian officials said the operation aimed to combat terrorist organizations and support a recognized government. The intervention significantly increased Russia's influence in the Middle East and demonstrated its military capabilities on the international stage. The Ukraine War. In February 2022, Russia launched a large-scale military invasion of Ukraine. The conflict quickly became one of the most significant international crises of the 21st century. Russia stated that its actions were related to security concerns and other stated objectives. Ukraine, along with much of the international community, condemned the invasion. The war led to severe humanitarian consequences, major economic sanctions against Russia, and widespread diplomatic tensions. The conflict remains one of the most closely followed events in global politics. Putin in 2026. By 2026, Vladimir Putin remained one of the world's most recognized political leaders. Throughout his career, he had served Russia as a KGB officer, government official, prime minister, and president. His leadership has continued to influence Russia's domestic policies, international relations, and global security discussions. Supporters often credit him with restoring national stability, strengthening state institutions, and increasing Russia's global influence. Critics argue that his administration has reduced political freedoms, limited independent media, and pursued policies that have heightened international tensions. Whatever one's perspective, few leaders have shaped 21st-century geopolitics as significantly as Vladimir Putin. His journey from a small apartment in post-war Leningrad to the Kremlin remains one of the most remarkable political stories of modern history. Lessons from his life. Vladimir Putin's story offers several lessons that historians and political observers often discuss. One lesson is the importance of discipline. From childhood to his years in intelligence service, discipline remains central to his character. Another lesson is preparation. Long before entering politics, he spent years developing skills that later proved valuable in leadership. His journey also demonstrates how historical events can completely change the direction of an individual's life. The collapse of the Soviet Union ended one career, but unexpectedly opened the door to another. Whether viewed as a strategist, a patriot, or a controversial world leader, Vladimir Putin's influence on modern history is undeniable. And that brings us to the end of today's story. From a young boy in Leningrad to a KGB officer, and eventually the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin's journey is one of the most extraordinary political stories of the modern era. Whether you admire his leadership or question his decisions, his impact on Russia and the world will continue to be studied for many years. Thank you for watching English Orbit. If you enjoyed this biography, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which historical figure you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring history.